Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Rebecca Keppel. Today's video is the long-awaited white gel pen comparison. The reason it took me so long to come out with this video is that I wanted to test these white gel pens over a period of time. Because the worst thing is when you get a white gel pen that you really like and you put it aside for a couple of weeks and you go back to it and then it doesn't work. So to be considered my favorite, I needed a white gel pen that was opaque white, that stood out on dark colored cardstock, that flowed smoothly without skips, and that worked over a long period of time. So in this video, I'm going to compare 4 different white gel pens, and I will tell you which one is my favorite. But I'm also going to share several different ways that I like to use white gel pens in my card making. So let's jump right into the comparison. Here are the white gel pens I'm comparing for today's video. First up is the one that I know many crafters are familiar with, the Signo Uni-Ball Broad Point Pen. I've been using this type of white gel pen for years, but recently I got a question about which pen I've been using more lately because another crafter mentioned that she was getting frustrated with the Signo not always performing as well. Next is the Art and Fly gel pens, which have a finer tip and a comfort grip barrel. Next is the Pentel Milky Pop white gel pen, which, as you can see, has a small rubber stopper right in the tip of the cap, which I think is supposed to help keep the pen from drying out, which would be great. Last is the Boxun gel pens. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I bought a box of 6, which also includes silver and gold, but we're just going to focus on the white today. These pens come with that waxy protective tip to keep them from drying out during shipment, but this needs to be removed and disposed of before you can use them. The Boxuns seems to be a medium point in between the broad Signo and the fine Art and Fly. So for my first test, I'm using a dark hot pink cardstock to see how well the different pens show up. You can see that the Art and Fly wrote very smoothly, and it does appear white on the pink cardstock. The Pentel also wrote smoothly, and it seemed to show up a bit brighter and more opaque than the Art and Fly. So I am using a test of text and an arrow and a little doodle. The Boxun struggled at first because a bit of that waxy protective tip was still on it, but once that came off, it was smooth and wrote without skips as well. I'm doodling that little arrow tip so you can see how the pens color in images as well. The first pen to skip was the Signo. To be fair, I've had this pen longer than the others, but it was working fine the last time I used it, and there's definitely tons of ink in the barrel still. I know there are tricks to get the ink flowing, but I wanted to see how these pens all do without any of that extra effort. My frustration with the Signo is that I often have to replace them even when I can tell there is tons of ink in the barrel. No matter if I store them horizontally or tip down, I've struggled to really keep them working consistently. I wanted to show how well the pens write and draw, so I have some doodles, some text, some long lines, and arrows. Now I'm even going to fill in some squares to see how opaque they are. All 3 of the first 3 pens that I tried flowed very smoothly without skips. It looks like the Pentel is the most opaque. I do love the broad tip of the Signo and how opaque it is, but I'm just tired of the hassle of trying to warm them up to make the pens work. From that day 1 comparison, you might be able to see already which one I'm leaning towards, but now let's take a look at comparison number 2, which was done about a month later. This time I'm working on black cardstock, so you can really see which of the pens shows up the whitest and the brightest. Mainly though, I wanted to share this second comparison to see if any of the pens started skipping or not flowing as smoothly. Again, I want to share how text, lines, filled in areas like the arrow tips, dots, and fake stitches look between the 4 pens. So the Art and Fly and Pentel are both super smooth, no skips in the ink, and both show up beautifully on the black cardstock. I do feel like the Pentel is a bit brighter and more opaque. The Boxun is also very smooth and without skips. It's probably very similar as far as opacity and brightness to the Art and Fly. Oddly enough, this time the Signo worked fine. As I mentioned, the broad line and opacity is great, but the lack of consistency makes me definitely want to lean towards the Pentel. Plus, I think the Pentel is as opaque as the Signo, and the medium point tip is actually easier to control as far as stitch lines and text. I was super surprised. The Pentel Milky Pop ended up being my absolute favorite, and I love the way it stood the test of time so far. Now let me share a few ways that I like to use this white gel pen in my card making. The first way is to clean up the borders around colored in stamped images. I tend to get a lot of coloring outside the lines. In person, this is very noticeable on these flowers, and there's only so much I can do with a colorless blender. Plus, if I had colored these in with pencil or watercolor, there'd be little to nothing for me to do to fix them. So I like to use the white gel pens on the white border to cover up those mistakes. I definitely found the Pentel worked great at this. It's definitely white enough and opaque enough to cover up even the reddish color that I got outside the lines, which is great because I feel like if you can cover red, you can pretty much cover anything. And the finer tip makes it easier to go around those die cut images and get just a little bit of ink outside the stamped image, but only on the white border there, where I think the Signo is almost a little too broad pointed, a little too thick to keep it on those fine lines. The second way is to add in some details or extreme highlights to those images. The other thing I struggle with in coloring is leaving enough of a highlight. I get so focused on trying to blend things out that I end up blending away the lightest parts of the image. With flowers, it's really nice to have a good white gel pen to add those highlights back in. It's not cheating, it really just makes the design pop. For those poinsettia leaves, I added lines on the leaf coming not quite towards the center and then swiping towards the lighter outer edges. It really adds some interest to those leaves, and especially since I only use two colors to blend them and there's not much detail inside the leaf itself. For the flower petals, I colored all the center parts of the flower petals darker, and I had the tips of the flowers as the lightest pink. But I really wanted some actual white highlights, so I drew those in with the gel pen kind of in the shape of the petal. I know this is not a necessary step in coloring flowers, but I love the interest it adds and how it hides some of my mistakes and draws attention to the layered look of the petals and the leaves. The other thing that I did was add some small dots towards the center of the petals. Not technically on the flower center, but just off of that on the petals, and I love the way those look too. Once I figured out exactly what I was doing here, this process went very quickly, and I'm so happy with how well the Pentel dots, highlights, and cover-ups look on these flowers. My third favorite way to use white gel pens is to add faux stitching on my card making. I know that this is such a super easy technique, but I love the homespun touch it adds, and it is definitely a lot faster than actually stitching it by hand or even pulling out my sewing machine. I was really happy with how the Pentel created faux stitches. First of all, it never skips. The ink looks bright white even on a light craft, and the tip of this pen is fine enough to create the look of an actual stitch. And the last way that I love to use white gel pens in card making is to add dots, which can be snow or stars or even tiny little doodled images. I liked the look of the dots on the flower petals so much that I decided to put them all around these flowers as well. Every time I touch the tip of the Pentel to the cardstock, it creates a dot. If I go slowly, I can create slightly larger dots. And then when I move more quickly, the dots are super fine and tiny. This is a great way to embellish a card if you don't have sequins or enamel dots in the right color, because white pretty much goes with everything. Plus, it adds such an elegant, fresh look. I also created a starry, snowy sky on this card with the Pentel gel pen. I'm working on a Distress Oxide inked background, and once again, the Pentel shows up beautifully. I was a little concerned that it might just show up on cardstock and not on an inked background. I doodled that stamped heat embossed star in a smaller format all around the card, and I added dots, hand-drawn stars, and asterisk stars too. I love the way that the Pentel Milky Pop shows up on the lighter and darker blue inks, and how easy it was to create this delicate sky background that works around my 3-part stamped sentiment, because I'm able to draw it in after the stamping and heat embossing is all done. These would be great on galaxy backgrounds too. If you've tried out the Pentel Milky Pop white gel pen, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear if you're having success with it. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more product reviews for card makers, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and hit that bell to be notified every time I have a new video available. As always, I want to thank you so much for spending time with me. Please stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you again soon.